The question every HR person gets. John, are we ready today?
Hey, Chuck, how are you? Thank you for coming in here and being here with us today. I'm
Yeah.
excited. What is the question that all HR people dread? Get.
Well, we do a lot of compliance stuff and we've got a
Yeah, yeah.
history of doing that, but I wanted to take some of our compliance things today and next week actually too, and give it well, how does this make the workplace better, right? How can we use this? How could managers and HR folks use these things to kind of like make their workplace better? And so
Okay, yeah,
anybody,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Right? Because how we respond, right? How we respond in the moment is going to either make the workplace better or not. And if we don't know how to respond,
right?
or we're just kind of ad-libbing at the moment, we're not going to get there.
Right. So
Okay.
anybody who's spent time in HR has kind of had this conversation. A manager walks into your office and says, "We've got a problem with an employee." And what do we do, right? What do they usually, because what they usually mean is, do we coach them? Do we give them a verbal warning? Do we get a written warning, final written suspension, or are we done? Do we say, goodbye? That progressive discipline sounds real clean when you put it on a chart, but in the real world, it rarely is. And so I've got a recent federal appeals court case that gives us a real good way to talk about that. It involves racial harassment, confrontation between two employees, two,
Two, two,
a,
two.
a punch, a punched locker, not a face,
Right? Yeah.
a
All right.
punched locker,
All right. That's
and
better. Yeah.
yeah, and oh, my fingers on that one, right? And a 5 day unpaid suspension and an EEO lawsuit that the employer ultimately won.
Let's
So
hear it for
yeah.
the employer. Let's hear it, right? How often do they get a chance to win?
Well, you're right, and if they would listen more to HR Stories podcast and making the workplace better, they would win more or not even have these problems. But look, I don't really want this to be a legal episode. We've done enough legal episodes. I want to
Right.
use this case and just, oh man, I was going to say twerk it. I tweak it.
Tweak it.
Yeah, I want to twerk this one a little bit, and ask a much more practical question. How do we decide how much discipline is enough? How do we decide?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say all this, right? And so I'm thinking about it, and the one thing that bothers me about the start, like the context of this,
Yes.
is the manager walking in and saying, "I have a problem with an employee," right? Because really, what they were saying, "I have a problem employee," right? And maybe that's not the problem. Maybe that's not, like, the system could be wrong, right? And the employee's responding to it. And I know we're going to get into like what should we do and how should we handle it and all that kind of stuff. But that's really, to me, we need to reteach our managers to come in and go, "I don't know what to do. Here's the issue. Here's the behaviors I'm seeing. How can you help me get there?" If they come in like that versus "I have a problem employee," I think it's going to be a better conversation. But I
Oh,
think
yeah.
here, right, I think it's like, so what is my first move, right? What is my first move if there's serious misconduct allegations?
Yeah.
And I think for me, when I hear that, I'm going to push back a little bit, right? Because I've been in enough situations where I know the managers have a very particular view, very particular expectation, and I want to know, does that employee understand those expectations? Do they understand that? And so really, I think and I think you would say this, maybe you wouldn't, it's about questioning what I'm hearing and then doing the investigation so I understand the full situation. Not that I don't trust managers, not that I don't trust employees, but I want to understand it from my point of view, put it in my world context, so then I can have a better, like, okay, how do I respond?
Yeah, and that's perfect because, and next week, if I give a hint on our episodes for next week, it does deal. It is a sister episode to this, so to speak, or a cousin, and it deals with the documentation.
Okay.
But you're right. The manager walks in, I got a problem. And ultimately, what happens is there have been situations that have been going on for so long that now, for
Right.
whatever reason, now it's a problem, right?
It's been 6 months, Chuck.
Yeah.
Oh, now it's a problem. Why didn't you come to me day one? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the case. It's the EEOC versus Sun Chemical Corporation.
All right. So
Here's
just for those people that are listening, the
yeah.
EEOC
Oh,
stands for Equal Employment Opportunity Commissions. Commission.
thank you, mysterious
You're welcome.
voice. So here's the short version: Brian Banks and Ricardo Navarez. And that's what, once again, John, this is one of the things I like about what we do. We go beyond just the headline and the story.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
dig deep. So we know who, we look at the court case and we read the court cases.
yeah.
So we know that Brian and Ricardo were technicians at Sun Chemical. Their working relationship had deteriorated. Navarez had originally trained Banks. Navarez was kind of a mentor to Banks.
Mm,
And but by the time of the incident, the two men were barely speaking. There was also something already important here in
okay.
Navarez's history. So remember, Navarez is the older employee, has been there for a while,
Okay.
and so Navarez, you know, had a situation that the company knew of. It was an earlier incident in which Navarez used the N word, a racial slur that begins with an N, right, towards another Black employee. I think we all know what that is. It's by this time in 2026 ish, right? So Sun Chemical,
Yeah.
so Navarez says this. Navarez says this.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Sun Chemical documents the incident, gave him a written discipline, and later the Eighth Circuit, this is interesting, said the company's response to that first incident could have been stronger, but also noted that Navarez had more than 30 years of service without a documented history of harassment. So, one thing I just want to put a pin in here
Okay.
is that first decision matters, okay?
Oh,
Because
okay.
this case eventually became partly about whether Sun Chemical had done enough when it learned of the racially offensive conduct.
And do we know? So, a couple questions, and you may not know the answers, and that's okay. Do we know the separation between these two incidents when he yelled the N word and when the story that we're talking about happened?
Yeah, it had been several years. In fact,
Okay.
from what I recall reading, the Brian Brian Banks, I don't believe was an employee at the time of the
Okay.
original N word.
Okay.
Okay, so
And so the
go
second
ahead.
question I have, sorry I interrupted. The second question I have, and you're probably not going to know the answer, was that written documentation, that written discipline in the context of the time, right? In the context of what was happening in that organization, was that a typical response? Like, would that, if you had looked at it and said, oh, yeah, okay, I see across the board, this is typically what people are doing, and we did that, or maybe you can just kind of guess yourself, like, do you think that Sun Chemical was like, yeah, that seems an appropriate response to that situation, or do you think, that doesn't make sense?
Yeah, well, here's the deal. I don't have access to the employee
Yeah, I know.
handbook.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
But this is a 30 plus year employee, one known racial slur incident, no previous documented harassment history before. So perhaps a written warning at that point is enough.
Okay.
Probably at my world, my place of employment, probably would have been a final written. Which the reason we use that term
Right.
and it's documented in the employee handbook. Final written is for progressive discipline or for a situation that is so egregious that if it happens again, it could result very easily in the termination of that employee.
Okay.
So
Yeah. All right. All right. Yeah. All right. I mean, it's again, I'm trying for the listeners, try to paint that context because I think it matters on how we would decide in the future when things came up. And so I'm trying to think as some chemical did, okay, that seemed like a reasonable response. Now, obviously the eighth court, like, well, maybe that wasn't a reasonable spot. But again, within their culture, within their context, they may have thought that. We don't know for sure, as you were saying. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you there and
no,
went
no,
off
no,
on a
that's
rail a
okay.
bit.
But like you said, and probably we're gonna, like I laid out a little bit, how much does tenure and past record matter? Could a single incident justify termination? Final warning versus suspension.
Yeah.
And also, John, did the employee own the behavior? Those are little factors that come into it. I've been in plenty of situations where you pull an employee in for a situation, and either A, they're like, oh boy, I got to tell you, you're right. I should never have done that. And you're like, okay, you know what? We're going to ease up. You get it. We're moving forward. But I've also been in plenty of situations where an employee digs in his heel and said, I did nothing wrong. And I'd
Yeah.
do it
Yeah. Yeah.
again. And sometimes, John, when that happens, I just want to be like, off with their heads.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah. What's
dude.
funny, you say that because I was listening to a Simon Sinek, I think it was a podcast he was on, and he said, I just had this incident where he was at some military Quantico. He was at Quantico, and the senior leader was late, and um, Simon's like, oh no, no big deal. And I was like, well, no, it was a big deal. I don't like to be late, but we had an employee that we're gonna terminate. We're gonna
Yeah.
terminate. And Simon's like, do you mind asking, like, why did that happen? And the person's like, well, he fell asleep on the job. And Simon's like, well, I just fell asleep. Like, what's the big deal? Like, what's that? And the general, whoever it was, said, well, look, here's the problem. He denied it. And then we gave him an opportunity. He denied it again. It wasn't until we showed him video evidence that he did it. And for us, it's all about trust. And if we don't trust each other and we can't trust them, then that's not. We had somebody else, the general says, a couple of weeks ago, fell asleep, but admitted it right away. Right. And so it's such a great, well, your point is such a great story because I think it resonates with us. If that person is willing to be like, I own it, I made a mistake, I screwed up, I understand the ramifications, punish me as you want, but I understand. I think
Yeah.
we're going to look at that person different than the person that hides it and tries to deny it and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And I see it every day in my job. So let's getting back to this with Sun Chemical. So Sun Chemical did not terminate Navarez after the first incident. It gave him that written discipline. Now let's fast forward. Navarez and Banks, they, like I said, now they got into a dispute involving comments about Navarez's work ethic, which is kind of interesting because, again, Navarez had been there for 30 years. Navarez trained Banks, mentor-mentee relationship. And when they get into this dispute, there's profanity back and forth. Banks walks away, and Navarez follows him to his locker in the locker room. Navarez then punches the locker hard enough to leave a dent and then repeatedly yells this N-word at Banks. Apparently, Banks must have been maybe a black African-American or Jamaican-American or Haitian-American, but that's what was going on. Yells it 3 times. Banks then reports it later that morning. Sun Chemical disciplines Navarez, gives him a 5-day unpaid suspension, and warns him that future incidents could lead to additional discipline, including termination. Banks also receives a written warning for his own profanity during the conversation. So, but if he used profanity, he didn't use racial slurs in this, right?
Right, yeah. So this is on top of what you said earlier, that they're not conversing, right? They're not talking. They're not having conversations. They're working together. Banks comes in and makes some snide comments about your work ethic, upsets Navarez. And then that Navarez comes in, bangs the locker, says the N word 3 times. And so now here we are, right? What are we doing? Like, how do we handle that, right? Is that the question we're thinking?
That's the question. So same employee, he follows a coworker, punches the locker, which there's no mention of violence in this counseling, because that's first thing I'm thinking.
Oh yeah.
Exhibit A, locker, dented locker, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it'd be interesting to see what their policy is around violence in the workplace, right? Because when we talk about this and we're talking to our clients, or we're talking in trainings, we're like, look, you need to have a no violence policy. You do one violence and you're out. Now, obviously, Sun Chemical did not have that. Otherwise, that person would have been gone for sure.
Yeah. So let me ask you, and I know you've kind of touched on this, but what are you doing? What are you going to do? You're now in charge. You're the HR person. Termination, what facts,
Yeah. And so
violence, safety. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Right. And so, again, I think what they did in terms of the unpaid suspension is good, because it pulls them apart, right? It pulls them apart. Maybe things can calm down.
Okay.
And kind of, okay, let's kind of figure out. I mean, 5 days.
Ding, ding, ding. Good. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah. 5 days seem long, right? Seems long to me. Because I would probably go home now. Don't come back tomorrow. I'll reach out to you because I'm going to start my investigation now.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm going to need to talk to you, and I want to have a conversation with you. I want to find out, but I want you to calm down. I want to know what's going on. I want to know the history. I'm going to have that same conversation with Banks. I'm going to get into it and really understand all the things that went on, and really document that. Right. And you've taught me that really well. Like, we need to document. Once I've gone through and I've talked to witnesses, I've talked to the 2 people, I go back and look at their history and their work and all that kind of stuff. I then want to go back and look out into the bigger picture and see what we've done across the company, across the place. So I can be like, all right, so this is what we did before. This is what we're going to do. I'm probably going to bring in some of my, if I have them, if not an HR department of one, bring in some of my coworkers and go, okay, here's what I found. What do you think? How do you want to handle it? Maybe talk to their leader and say, look, this is what happened. This is what, what are you thinking? I do know, right, Chuck? I do know managers of these individuals. We're going to be like, I can't lose them. I need to hold on to them. Is there anything we can do to keep them here?
Yeah,
right?
of course. Yeah.
Unless they're a problem employee, then they're like, yeah, let's get rid of them tomorrow. Why are you keeping them? Right. And so we're caught into that. I think those are the things. I really want to know exactly what started it, and really want to know what happened back, right? Why? And so here's the thing that I would drive home, and I drive it home now in all my leadership courses. This may seem irrational to us, right? Banging the locker, punching the locker, saying the N-word may seem completely irrational to us. But from Navarez's point of view, it was completely rational. They made a rational decision, like, this is what I'm going to do. But we don't know what happened. Did something happen in their family? Right. And so really understanding all that, which led to, okay, that makes sense. Try to see their point of view. That doesn't excuse what they did, right? Their consequences still need to be the consequences.
Yeah. So listen, for a guy that doesn't sit in the chair every day like me and deal with these situations on a frequent basis, you get some gold stars. Okay. You did a great job. So my first thought is, let's take a look at what is the handbook promise, right? What does the handbook say? That's a big one for me. If your handbook, and you've alluded to this in a couple of different ways as far as the consistency and such. So if your handbook says the company has 0 tolerance for racial harassment, threats, and workplace violence, then you have to take your own language seriously. You cannot proudly tell employees we have 0 tolerance for racial harassment, and when somebody follows a coworker, punches a locker, screams racial slurs at them several times, then you act as though your policy language means Nothing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, if the facts fit the conduct, your policy calls for zero tolerance. I think you have a much clearer path to termination. And if you routinely ignore absolute language in your policies, eventually employees are going to question whether those policies have any legitimacy at all. It is tough for a 30-year employee. I mean, this guy really ingrained. Everyone probably knew Navarro's, right?
Yeah.
But that's also why I generally prefer carefully written policies that say, misconduct may result in termination up to or discipline up to including termination. May. That
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
preserves a little judgment. Serious conduct can still lead to direct termination, right? But the policy does not pretend in every situation it's identical.
So here's the counterpoint to that, right? Because if we say, well, it may lead to termination, then we have this 30-year-old employee. Well, we can't lose them. What can we do? And then we start being persuaded by the emotional part of that. And then we make that decision and go, all right, well, we'll give him a final written warning, or a final written warning. And if it happens again, they're gone. And it does give us that easy out. And so the counterpoint, I get what you're saying, and I kind of agree with what you're saying, but there's that gray area that can get you in trouble when it says may, and we're persuaded by a leader in the organization to go, look, this person has institutional knowledge. It's really important. We need to keep them, or they're our best salesperson or whatever. And so then we make that decision. How does that look across the organization?
Yeah. And we don't know the internal politics. It could be a one owner of this company. And he said, but listen, here's the deal. On these facts alone, I probably would have terminated Navarro's, based on the employee handbooks that I've worked with over the past couple of years. It's not just a racial slur. I'm looking at the entire event, like you were saying. And he follows the employee. He punches their locker, the employee's locker. In other words, if this were your face, that he didn't punch any locker, he punched the employee's locker. So I look at those little things. He repeatedly directed the slurs at him. I'm sure he wasn't just talking like you and I. And it's not the first time the company's reported this incident. That's a lot for me. And this is where HR gets more complicated than a policy chart. I still, like you just said, John, because here's the deal. You're hitting this on all cylinders today, because I still want to understand the people involved and what I learned from the investigation, because there is that human side. I mean, I don't know. Do you agree that probably ends in termination, or is there a scenario?
I think, yeah. I mean, to me, again, I don't know the context. I don't know the culture. I don't know the environment. But I think punching the locker, the N-word, I'm trying to put myself in Ryan Banks's point of view. Like, here's this person coming at me. Do I feel psychologically safe? Do I feel physically safe in that work environment? Am I waiting for this person to always go off? And then how am I going to be making those decisions in the moment? And I think one of the things that I would suggest for all of us, we make the decision to terminate the employee, right? We make the decision to terminate the employee. But the question becomes, what was missed systematically that allowed this to happen in the first place?
Yeah.
Right? Why wasn't a manager going like, look, you guys got to get along. I can't have you not talking to each other. Communication is critical here. Pulling them in, having the conversation preemptively to be like, all right, how can we get you to work together? What's going on? Maybe I need to separate them now. Maybe, I don't know. But there's something that the leadership missed here, and just going back and not blaming anyone because it's a system problem, but going in going, all right, what knowledge did we have? What actions could we take? Did the manager overseeing them not have good conflict resolution skills? Do I need to get them trained on that? There's so many opportunities for learning here.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are right. We're in that fast mode. Boom, boom, boom. We got to get things. I'm terminating. Here's the paperwork. Boom, it's done. And then we forget to look back to see what we can learn.
So let me kind of head us towards a kind of a conclusion here,
Sure.
wrapping up some of the things we talked about, because some of the things I'm going to say we've kind of touched down, but touchdown. It's almost football season. We've touched on. So sometimes, as I said, when you investigate something ugly and the employee who did it sits down with you and said, look, I screwed up. I lost my temper. I'm embarrassed. There's no excuse for what I said. I want to apologize. This will never happen again. Doesn't erase the conduct. Genuine remorse is not a magic get out of discipline card either, but it is information. And maybe the employee was who was targeted tells you, you know what? I don't want this person to lose a 30-year career. I need him to understand he can never speak to me that way again. I want to know the company takes it seriously. Maybe I'm comfortable if it's moving forward, if it stops. That is one fact pattern. Okay. Now imagine the employee says, hey, he followed me, hit my locker. I'm afraid of him, right? This is what you were alluding to. I do not feel safe if he comes back. It's a very different fact pattern. Now, I'm not merely deciding how much punishment the offender deserves, but I'm deciding whether I can responsibly return this person back to the workplace and tell the other employee with a straight face, hey, we addressed this. You are safe here.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think the other thing, right? The other context of this is this probably wasn't an incident. I want to say isolated incident, but it wasn't an incident where others don't know about it, right? And so Banks, of course, is going around. You won't believe what happened. Blah 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 blah. Even if he feels safe, other people may not.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's why we have these policies. That's why we're trying to hold them to that policy and be like, you know what? Look, the two of you could just been blowing off steam, right? We have it. People that coworkers that have worked together and they get annoyed and they get into these little tussles and they're like, it's fine. Somebody else in the workplace goes, you know what? I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe about it.
Yeah. So this is where I think the Sun Chemical case becomes useful, even if you've not handled a harassment complaint. A lot of organizations have that version of verbal, written, final written, suspension, terminations. And managers sometimes treat those as mandatory steps, even if everyone is legally entitled to collect the whole set. As if you have to collect the whole set of before you can be fired. So that's not what progressive discipline should be. It's not how I define it. It's not how I teach it to other HR people. Sometimes we skip steps because the conduct is serious. Sometimes we repeat a step. Maybe it's been a couple of years since the last situation and it's a similar situation. Sometimes one incident destroys the employment relationship. But the Eighth Circuit decision is useful here. And this is what I want to say. The court said in substance that the law did not require Sun Chemical to fire Navarez after the first known incident. The focus was whether the employer's response was reasonably calculated to stop the harassment. The court also recognized that when harassment repeats, an employer then may need to escalate the process. And, I got this from Eric Meyer, the employer handbook guy. And he had a commentary that I really enjoy his commentary. And he makes an important distinction. The appellate court closely examined that first written warning. And it did not issue some blanket rule that a 5-day suspension is always enough for the later racial harassment case. So basically, nobody should walk away from this case saying that the court says 5 days is proper punishment. I think that is not what this decision is saying. So I know we're a little muddled here, but let's kind of bring it back home, John, and we'll see where we go. What do you think?
All right, sounds good.
Sounds
good. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was trying to think about it. Like you asked the question about managers always following progressive discipline. And again, we simplify life, right? We're always trying to simplify. If
Yeah.
I know this, I can know this, I know that. And I think we have to understand that the decision has to fit the behavior, right? The consequences have to fit the behavior. And there's going to be a lot of things going in there. But understanding what that behavior is, why that behavior happened, understanding the context, we're going to be making better decisions for sure to kind of do that. What's the other thing what other consistency or factor that you
Yes.
have?
You brought this up, John. So like I said, you hit early on in our podcast when I said, what would you do? You hit all the markers. So consistency is the question that can change everything. Never ignore what have we done before.
Yeah.
Okay. Suppose I'm leaning towards a 5-day suspension, but then I discovered, hey, we terminated someone last year for pretty much the same thing. Now I have another issue. I need to understand whether the cases are truly comparable. If they are, why would I be treating this employee differently? Then on the flip side, if the organization has historically used final warnings or suspensions for comparable first offenses, that history is also relevant. Consistency does not mean every employee mathematically gets identical discipline. Let's make sure that's clear.
Right.
Facts differ, histories differ, jobs differ. But if the outcome is different, HR should be able to articulate, or management or the company should be able to articulate a legitimate reason why.
I like that. I like that. Yeah. And I definitely think as you kind of look ahead and think back, one of the things that you've always preached, and I preach as well, is you have to look around. What did we do? Because that's when it's going to get you in trouble. When you're inconsistent with your decisions, that's going to get you in trouble because they're going to find some protected class, or they're going to find some way to be like, well, you didn't do this for this type of person. Why did you do it for them? And it may have nothing to do with that. That may not even been in your thought, but you did something differently. And if you can't document it, if you can't come up with that reason, you're going to get yourselves in trouble for sure. I'm doing it. So Chuck, when we're in that chair, how do we handle this? What's the idea? What's the concept?
John, we wrote a book. Let's pull it up here. Yeah. And you know how we like checklists. We wrote a book. Yeah, you can find this, folks, on Amazon.com or go to ultimateguidetohr.com. Anyways, I'm going to put in the show notes, John, a discipline checklist.
Okay.
If you're sitting in HR or you have a manager in HR, I've got a great checklist that just developed for this story. It will be in the show notes, but this is where the story fits our bigger goal of making work better. Discipline should not simply be about creating, let's say, a document that helps the company win. Hey, if somebody eventually files an EEOC charge, good discipline. And, I kind of I wish I had a better word for that in the workplace, right? But good discipline should improve the workplace after the incident. I want to say that again. Good discipline, good disciplinary actions should improve the workplace after the incident. The employee should understand what went wrong, what has to change. The person affected should know the company took the matter seriously. Other employees should know and see that expectations mean something, and managers should see consistency. And ideally, the behavior does not happen again, because we're all there to do a job, and go home to our families, right? Sun Chemical won this lawsuit, John, and that matters. But I think HR should hold itself to a question that goes beyond, could we defend this decision in court? Like, in other words, beyond that, something beyond that, right? We should also ask, was this really the right decision for our people, our culture, and our workplace? Final thoughts, John. Close this out.
I think this was a great I love what you did here. And I love this story in terms of thinking of it beyond the legal case and thinking about how do we bring the workplace and make it a better workplace. And I love that concept of let's make the workplace better for that discipline, right? And it's all about behaviors and consequences, behaviors and consequences, behaviors and consequences. If individuals in the workplace do not see that there's consequences to their behaviors, then they're just going to keep doing them.
Yeah.
And that's where we want them to get better. We want to improve, and we need to create a culture where we're all moving forward. We're all getting better. Now, listen, I get it, right? We get hot-headed. We're in the moment. We may say something that we're not want to say. We have to forgive that and move on. But if it reaches that level, you're knocking on a locker. I think that's a problem. And you definitely want to address that.
Yeah. So sometimes the answer is a coaching. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's 5 days at home. And sometimes the right answer is we cannot bring this person back. Knowing the difference and being able to explain why is part of what good HR and good management does. Progressive discipline gives us a framework. It does not replace judgment. So when we get that right, we do more than reduce risk. We do what, John?
We get HR right.
Well, we get HR right and we make the workplace better.
We make the workplace better. Sorry.
See you next week.
All right. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone.